It's been an experimental for, I don't know, probably 3 years by now, maybe, and doesn't really show signs of progressing. I think it's a really useful feature, but the implementation is kind of problematic. So I was hoping we'd have some discussion on what we want to do with it. In particular, I'm a bit worried about people wasting time making incremental small improvements if there's no path to it actually being out of alpha without complete rehaul, since that's just a waste of time for everyone involved. So that's about it. This really needs Mitch here to make substantial progress, but any comments on this are welcome.
Well, do we just need a different forum people, Mitch included? Did he create this feature?
I don't know if he created it. He's definitely heavily involved. Also, the feature is off by default. I'm not sure exactly what you meant by your comment, Stephen, but. Yeah, so my intent was not whether it should be on or off. It should definitely be off because it's very problematic in its current state. The question really was whether it's worth investing time incrementally improving it, or if we need to either completely scrap it and be done with it, or scrap it and kind of redo it from the ground up in a way that's, going to be able to be on by default in the future.
What specifically is problematic about it, or what are the things about it that make it really gross?
Yeah, we have a big issue with that's like kind of aggregating all the issues. There's like 30 sub issues, so there's a lot. But in general, It's just the wrong architecture. Like what it's doing is on its timer every like 10 seconds or something, it's going and looking through all the config and then running all these analyzers that look at all the config. And most of them are n-squared algorithms to do the analysis and then updating the status. So it's really kind of slapping a CLI tool onto production system, and it ends up being like absurdly CPU and memory and intensive. So. I also personally think the actual data out of the analysis tool is pretty poor because it's kind of a black box system. It's not like it tries to go retroactively look at a virtual service and gateway and decide whether they work, for example, but the logic that does that is not the same as the actual code that looks at them and programs them. So there's constantly drift between them. That doesn't necessarily need to be coupled with the fact that it's not tenable for performance reasons, but something that could potentially be improved in the process.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm pretty new to Istio, but something I'm curious about is you mentioned whether or not we should scrap this feature or incrementally improve it. I'm just wondering like how decisions like that get made based on like usage, and are we able to even determine that?
Yeah, usage determination is tricky. For certain fields and features, we have some data from cloud vendors or other vendors that can get that information. But not all information is typically available that way. For other things, it's open source. Like we don't have telemetry in our product that's reporting back to some centralized thing that's telling us what people are using. Maybe we should, but that's super controversial. So we could rely a lot on word of mouth of what people are using. Now, that being said, like any feature that's experimental, we have no obligations. Like we can rip it out, all experimental features in the next release on a dime if we wanted to. But obviously that wouldn't be a good idea if there, if there's demand and whatnot. But at some point, towards the start of the project, we were kind of all the features all the time. Let's dump everything we can. Now we're kind of getting to the state where we're trying to make sure features are moving up or out. Like we don't want a big pile of 100 experimental features languishing around.
That's good to know. Thanks for the context, John.
So what do we need to make a decision on this?
We need at least Mitch's opinion. I mean, I think it's tricky because I think what it will take to, well, it seems like what it will take to stay is someone to sign up to actually own it, right? If we're going with the process of moving things up or out, and there's no one that's willing to move it up, then the kind of obvious step is to move it out, right? That would be disappointing, I think, because there's actually a lot of interest in this feature, and I think it's a useful feature to have, but there's a lot of useful features we could have, right? We need to cut our losses if we can't actually sustain them. It seems like there is some interest in working on it, which is part of why I brought it up, is that I see occasional PRs that are fixing tiny aspects of it, and I worry that they're wasting their time by not investing more time, if that makes sense.
Sorry, I'm late. Which feature is this, John?
We're talking about the status, in particular, the writing the analysis to status, but I didn't directly talk about the distribution stuff, but we could lump those together if we wanted. Basically, as you know, it's been experimental for like 3 years. And I worry that people are wasting time making small improvements when we either need to redo it or remove it.
Yeah, I mean, I had concerns when it was initially launched. I still have concerns. And, the new status in Kubernetes is more or less standardized and adopted by others. In this particular case, I feel pretty strongly about out, or at least into the direction of what Kubernetes status is doing. So to have parity with HTTP route.
What would that mean to be in the direction of what they're doing?
I'm saying that preserving exactly what we have, it's dead end, because again, we hope people will move to HTTP route. We hope tools will adopt HTTP route status, or good or worse. I don't think it has a future beyond next 6 to 9 months when HTTP route is still moving forward. It's worth maybe to add the same HTTP status to virtual service and gateways that HTTP route has. I don't know, but other Istio specific statuses, I don't see a future for them if they are not pushed to gateway working group.
I see what you mean. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, one thing that I would want to check before we got rid of it, and I don't recall the Istio.io tests at the moment, but I thought we needed to have that set for some of the tests to actually pass. So we're looking for some status.
Well, if we remove the feature, then we'll remove the test of the feature as well, right? Wouldn't we?
Well, I'm thinking we're using it outside of just the feature, but I'd have to go and look.
Oh, I see, because we're using the weight part. Well, for what it's worth, the weight and the status, well, there's 2 parts of status. I was actually mostly talking about the analysis, which is probably not used. You're probably talking about the weight feature.
Yes.
Actually, the weight doesn't even depend on, well, it's complicated. There's like a few interrelated features. I think we can probably test things without that. I mean, we do our tests without it in the main Istio repo, and the reason we do that is because the feature doesn't actually work correctly. So I agree. We should look into that, but I'm not terribly concerned by it.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise it as an item, but
But I think it's worth discussing about the mechanics of how we get rid of it, of move forward or out. It's very risky to make any kind of change in something that shifts in Istio. However, we have ambient coming, we have gateway coming. So I suspect the safest approach is to just not move them forward. So if you're working on safe or ambient mode, do not enable this feature and turn it off. But I
Already
don't
off by default.
it is off by default, but people can still that's a problem we discussed a few weeks ago. And
Well, so what would we do in ambient then if it's already turned off?
Not allowed to be set. I mean, the problem is that even if it's off, what if someone is using installer and enables it?
Okay, so deny, like force deny.
So for ambient and safe, I still think we need a mode where users will be kind of guaranteed to have only the forward-looking features and not have the features that will not work or we plan to delete or something like that. I don't know what is a proper way, but at some point we need to cut the cord, basically.
I'm curious, is there any timeline that we're working with to have to remove this feature?
No,
what is
there's no
driving making this
timeline really.
decision?
We've had it for 3 years. There's no rush. The main issue I had was actually not. It was developers wasting their time on a dead end feature.
I see. So we know for sure we don't want to move forward with this current direction. Based on the work that I'm doing in feature flagging and feature status, I'm a fan of moving it out and figuring out a way on how we can potentially update the backlog or issue to make this a problem or issue someone can pick up and actually own.
Sorry, you meant you want to move them out and remove it from Istio?
Yeah, I will ideally want it to be moved out based on the fact that there isn't any owner right now and the fact that any work that is being done on it is ideally the wrong architecture.
Yeah, I mean, what I was trying to say earlier is that my concern is that we have a lot of other features in this state, and it's very difficult to move out anything without risk to break someone. A much safer approach is to soft deprecate it. Don't move it forward in ambient and in the kind of the new mode of Istio, but let it die naturally because we hope that a lot of people next year will move to ambient. We know a lot of people move to HTTP route and to gateway API, so there is not. It's more expensive to try to remove it than to leave it there and with minimal support.
But I'm afraid that if we do soft deprecate it, it might just stay in that space forever. So I guess we do need to come up with some criteria around how we actually deprecate something fully. And that is some work that I can investigate on my end.
If it's generic, because that's kind of a tiny example of 100 of other features like that. If we can come up with a policy, I'm happy, but realistically, I think you will spend a lot of time on something that would be probably useless in a year.
I'm confused. What are we spending time on if we're removing the feature? My whole concern is that by keeping the feature, we're wasting time because we're spending time maintaining it when it's a dead end, right?
Correct. Yeah, I'm not sure how we are measuring what is expensive.
Well, I think it's time that someone, if you want to spend time on it, go for it. I'm not. I mean, it needs to die. The question is, how do we verify that nobody has? I mean, what happens if someone actually has this feature enabled in their environment and depend on it?
That's fine. They don't get to use it anymore. We deleted it.
Okay, I mean, is there anyone who could use it in in a production workflow and with CI/CD or something that will be broken by an upgrade when this goes away?
I think it would. This is actually kind of a feature that would be hard to be broken by, or hard broken. You may be annoyed that it's no longer there, but it's not like the waiting stuff. wait, I could see you use that in CI/CD.
Okay.
This just tells you if your thing's broken or not. If you're doing in CI, you'd probably actually use the offline analyze tool anyways.
I mean, if we are sure that it cannot be used it cannot break any user, then I'm perfectly, happy to get rid of it. My concern is, how do we figure out if something is hurting any user on upgrade? I mean, you upgrade to 1x+1 and suddenly something breaks. I agree. This case probably it will be a simpler solution. So I agree with you. Okay.
All right, I'll discuss a bit more with Mitch and then my other offliner in the next meeting and report back. I think that was the only topic. Is there anything else we should discuss?
All right, sounds like that's it. Great. Thank you, folks. Let's get half an hour back.